But in Robert Frank's America, everyone was an outsider.
Everyone is trapped in these pictures.
Hello again. Today I want to look at Robert Frank's legacy, how he and his book The Americans changed photography and photographers forever. So much has been said and written about his work, and it makes it really difficult to talk about him without repeating the same information. His impact stretches beyond street photography, documentary, and photojournalism. Those are the obvious genres that one thinks about when considering the influence made by the 83 images that make up his landmark publication. But it isn't just the look and feel of his photographs that has been transformational. When he set out on his road trips across America, he was staging an assault on the photographic conventions that governed the actual reason why photographs were produced. He discarded the neat, polished aesthetic of Eve Arnold, Irving, Penn, and Richard Avedon, and the neat, polished view of American society that they projected. He was prepared to peer under the rug and report back to the world about the darkness that he found there. It wasn't a pretty sight, and the US and the photographic community weren't ready to accept his vision.
They say that the camera never lies, but it can stretch the...
To put Frank's achievement in context, one has to consider how brave it was during that time to step so far out of what was considered acceptable. His achievement could possibly be compared with Roger Bannister believing that it was possible to run the mile in under 4 minutes. Once Bannister had achieved this feat, a whole string of runners then followed his example. The initial group of photographers that emerged following the publication of The Americans in 1958 included Gary Winogrand, Lee Freelander, and Diane Arbus. MoMA photography director John Sikowski, who had a great sense of where photography was going, put together an exhibition in 1967 called New Documents. It included images by these 3 photographers. Winogrand and Freelander could broadly be described as street photographers, and their subject matter essentially mirrors that of Frank, while Diane Arbus was chiefly a portrait photographer. But the manner in which she photographed and the intention or motivation for producing her work was similar to Frank's. She was delving below the glossy exterior of society while she focused on her freaks. What made her work so impactful was that she managed to peer beyond the facade of normalcy that we present to the world, thereby exposing her subject's inner darkness and vulnerabilities. If you view the portraits of the earlier photographers like Arnold, Penn, and Avedon alongside Arbus's, they are almost incomparable. I doubt, though, whether her vision would have been accepted if Frank hadn't first broken down the walls of niceness. Arbus considered Frank to be a major influence on her work. She described his photographs as having a hollowness. By that she meant that his photographs involve what she describes as a non-drama, a drama in which the center has been removed. I think when looking at a lot of Arbus's work, she's internalized that hollowness. At the start she used a 35mm camera like Frank, but eventually she shifted to her signature 2¼ square. Gary Winogrand and Lee Freelander were bold enough to venture closer to Frank's actual domain, and they managed to emerge with a vision that they could call their own. Their images are mainly black and white depictions of American life. Like Frank, they were not composing neatly. Their horizons were often tilted, and the compositions were no longer governed by the conventions established during the time of, say, Alfred Stieglitz or Edward Weston. Particularly in Winogrand's case, it's the way that he forms his images that defines his personal aesthetic.
We know too much about how photographs look, or pictures look. And it's the easiest thing in the world. It's natural to make those pictures we know. It's boring. You don't learn anything that way. You keep making what you know. So I try to deal with things. I've worked out my own way, I guess, to contend with that problem of being programmed about knowing too much about pictures. You see?
William Eggleston's early photographs were inspired by Frank and by Henri Cartier-Bresson. In the 70s, he started working in color and also shifted away from making direct statements about society. He took pictures of places where no one had ever bothered to point a camera. In 1961, Frank said, "You can photograph anything now," but it took Eggleston to prove that. Many great photographers have been impacted by particular photographs from the Americans. And as they've mined down into the depths of the image, they've discovered something that has informed the progression of their own work. Eugene Richards dedicated his book Americans We to Frank. The first picture in Frank's book is what stopped Richards in his tracks. He realized that all through his life, as a kid growing up in the inner city and as a photographer, he'd seen the people in this photo 1,000 times as they stared back at him, appearing at first harmless and then judgmental or afraid. When Mary Ellen Mark first saw this photograph exposing racism and servitude, it made her want to become a documentary photographer. She was drawn to the tonal differences in the two shades of skin and how their positions in society were so defined and separated. She recognized the power that photography had if one was able to instill it with emotional content. In this picture, Mark observed that Frank had done something that was daring for that period, and this was that he had cut off part of the subject. She became aware that an image is also about how much you leave out of the frame. If it were just the man with the tuba alone, it wouldn't have been a very strong image. The edgy framing provides a sense of spontaneity. Photojournalism had always provided a means for photographers to respond to society's complications. But Frank's work opened up this field by allowing photographers to include elements of lyricism, subtlety, and metaphor. As a young photographer starting out, Maggie Stieber saw the Americans as her Bible. From Frank's work, she learned how to visualize things without being obvious. She said that she became aware that the simplest photograph might carry the greatest meaning. Each time that she was sent on an assignment, she would return to the Americans for inspiration. Through his work, she learned how to reveal complex aspects of human experience.
On the day that I went to watch Robert Frank, only because of Robert's movement, it was a medium that was open to incredible physical, sensual, and even a spiritual dimension if you could feel these gestural things as part of people's spirit. By the time I got to my office, and my boss asked me how it went, and I said, it was fine, Harry, I'm quitting. And his response was, oh, what went wrong? And I said, no, nothing. It was fantastic, but I want to be a photographer. I'm a photographer. And he said to me, do you have a camera? I said, no. He said, schmuck, if you're going to take pictures, you need a camera. And he opened his drawer and he took out his pen packs and he said, here, use this.
For Joel Meyerowitz, this photograph of Frank's led to a significant turning point for him. He found the image puzzling in many ways. Why did Frank decide that this busy pedestrian moment was worth an image? Also, why did he include this in his book when the scene was so generalized? Over time, Meyerowitz came to realize that the reasons for making a photograph and what it may mean later are two different things. And then what it means to someone else is yet another thing. When I was starting out as a photographer, I was mesmerized by how Frank managed to achieve poetic compositions while exposing the raw harshness of existence. There's nothing sentimental about his work, but it always impacted me emotionally. In the 19th century, a Buddhist sage stated, "If you meet the Buddha on the road, kill him." Now that doesn't mean that the Buddhists were getting restless and were advocating for violence. His intention was to shock student monks into realizing that they themselves were Buddhas and that they had no need to depend on revered figures. I guess in the same way, I felt trapped by a sense that until I had fully internalized Frank's work, it was impossible for me to move on as a photographer. By that point in my development, Gary Winogrand's work had merged in my mind with Frank's. I set out on a 4-year project to rid myself of my own Buddhas. I hope that you found something in this discussion and also in Frank's work that resonated with your own work. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.
This work says that the truthful description of ordinary life is, in a way, a celebration. It doesn't matter how bleak what you're looking at, you're overjoyed to be able to see as clearly as that and to tell a story as truthfully as that.